So a guy shows up at your front door, and he says, can I have a few minutes of your time? I've got to tell you about something. You say, oh, well, what is this? I'm busy. Well, I'm new in the area, and I perform certain services, and I think if you'll give me a few minutes of your time to explain what I do, you will agree that you cannot possibly live without the services I provide. And you say, oh, make it quick. He says, okay. Now, it's kind of complicated. It's not quite as simple as somebody just happens to sell you a certain product, and you say, all right, can you hurry and get to the point? What services do you perform? And he says, well, that depends. You see, I and my team of other people who help me, we decide from time to time what services we think you need. And it might be that we give you food if you need it, or it might be that we help fix your car if you need it. It might be that we protect you from scary people in the world. But we decide what services that we think you need. And so you say, so I don't even know ahead of time what I'm paying for? Well, no, but you just trust that we have your best interests at heart. These services just sounds pretty weird to me. Well, what does it cost? Well, we decide on a regular basis how much it's going to cost you, and the price may change, it may fluctuate, but we'll decide that. We'll decide what the services are worth and what you should pay and what we're going to do for you, if anything. And you say, this sounds way too vague. I'm not doing this. I'm not interested. Get out. He says, well, maybe I wasn't clear. I didn't get around to explaining this part. You don't actually have a choice about whether to hire us. I'm just here letting you know that we're in town and we talk to your other neighbors, and this is what we do. We will decide what services to provide for you, and we will decide the price, and we really need you to participate. I mean, your other neighbors are going along with this, and we need you to go along too and do your fair share. And you're saying, what do you mean? I don't have a choice whether to pay you or not? Like, what are you going to do if I don't? Well, we don't want to get into that, but I'll just say there can be adverse consequences if you don't pay for our services. But we don't get into that because I'm sure you want to cooperate and be part of the community and chip in and help out like a good member of the neighborhood would. And you say, this is sounding really shady and weird, and you sound like a psycho, so please get out. And slam the door in his face. He comes back the next day with somebody else. And he says, I was thinking about it, and maybe you're right. It just did come across kind of pushy last time, and I'm sorry about that. So this time I promise you're in charge. It's up to you. You're the boss. And I'm sorry if we came across as kind of pushy before. And you say, okay, so now I get to decide what services I need? Well, no, you still don't get to decide. We still decide that. Well, do I get to decide what I'm willing to pay for it? No, we still determine the price, me and my buddy here. And you still don't exactly have a choice about whether to pay for it or not. You say, that's exactly what you said yesterday. It's just, no, wait, no, it's not. You see, here's the arrangement. Each week, me and my buddy are going to come here, and you get to decide which one of us will be running the things that week, and we'll decide what services you need and how much it'll cost, which you do have to pay. But see, really, you're in charge, because if you don't like it one week, the next week you can decide that the other one of us will be in charge and decide what services you need. And so you're in charge, because you get a choice. I mean, isn't that what freedom is all about? You have a choice between me and my cousin Bubba. And so it's up to you. You're the boss. And you say, I'm still not the boss. You're just threatening me twice. Please go away. You slam the door in his face again. He comes back again the next day and says, maybe I didn't quite explain things right. You see, when we perform these services for you, when we decide what you need, what's best for you, what's best for the neighborhood, because sometimes it might not be you who's benefiting. It might be that someone down the street needs help, and we'll be helping them. You might not actually get any services yourself, or we might do things that you don't particularly want. But we're all in this together, so what matters is that everybody in the neighborhood participates, and in a way we're representing you, because we're deciding what's best for the neighborhood as a whole, and we're deciding what that should cost and what your fair share is, and then you pay up, or there will be adverse consequences. And you say, you keep saying adverse consequences. What do you mean? Are you threatening me, or are you just saying things will work better if I pay up? Well, we can't allow people to freeload. We can't allow people to not contribute to the good of the neighborhood. And you say, you're just threatening me. You're just the mafia. You just don't want to come out and say it. And you slam the door in his face. The next day, somebody else shows up and says, hi, I'm running for U.S. Congress. And I have some great plans of what should be done in this country. And I have some ideas of what me and my organization called the United States government can do for you. And you say, well, do I get to decide what you do for me? Well, no. You can ask, you can beg, but ultimately I decide. Well, do I get to decide how much I'm willing to pay for this? No, we decide the price, and it'll change, and it'll usually go up on a regular basis. Well, this doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Do I get a choice to not pay? No, you don't get that choice. Now, what is the difference between the two scenarios? In the first, I'm pretty sure everybody here would recognize that guy, when he shows up at your front door, and then when he shows up again with his cousin Bubba, there's something wrong with him. Like, not only is he a criminal, not only is he threatening you and being vague and weird, nobody would agree to that. Yeah, you can perform whatever services you decide to perform or not, and charge whatever you want, and hurt me if I don't pay. Nobody in their regular life would accept that. We'd all recognize that as criminal, if not downright insane, if somebody showed up at our door and suggested that. What can we conclude from the fact that almost everybody recognizes that? We can conclude that almost everybody inside is an anarchist. Because the guy who shows up at your door and says, I'm a congressman, is making the exact same deal. And the only reason anybody recognizes it as legitimate or valid at all is because they were indoctrinated by the time they were really little to think that when certain people do this insane, destructive, immoral thing, it's okay. When anybody else does it, we recognize it as this guy is a creepy, invading, attacking, thieving mafia thug. The point of my talk today is that we are all born anarchists, we all grow up as anarchists, we are all anarchists 99.9% of the time, but we are taught that there's this little weird exception that if we don't have, it's the end of the world. And how many times have you heard or even said yourself that we can't possibly survive without government? We need some sort of government or there'll be chaos and mayhem. The only ingredient government adds to the equation is somebody coming to you and say, I'm not one of those organizations that you can decide to fund, that you can say you want to say what services you want, and you can say, I don't want that one, I do want that one. I would have wanted that one, but it's too expensive, so I'll go somewhere else. No, we're one of the organizations that gets to decide for you, for your own good, what you have to pay for. And that is the only context in which we would accept that. And I want to go through some of the other things that we only accept in the context of political mythology. Now, if two guys come to your door and said, one of us is going to rob you, but you get to choose, I don't think any of us are dumb enough to think that means we're in charge. And yet every single person who thinks democracy is a great thing thinks that we're in charge because we get to choose between two people threatening us with violence and stealing our stuff. But only in that context. Only if it's done within the rituals that we've been taught are legitimate. Well, the Constitution is there, and we have elections, and they have these big buildings, and they wear these fancy suits and say big words, so it must be real when they do it. We don't believe it when the guy and Bubba show up at the door and say, one of us is going to rob you, and that means you're in charge. But if they do enough rituals and put on an impressive enough show, most of the world believes in that and downright worships democracy. I'm here to tell you democracy is insane and one of the biggest threats to humanity because it's the guy and his cousin saying, you get to decide which one of us is going to boss you around and take your money. That doesn't mean you're in charge, and we would all recognize that in any other context. On one hand, everybody knows if you don't pay tribute to the ruling class, and yes, it is a ruling class, and we don't use that term anymore, but it totally is. If you don't pay tribute, we all know bad things will happen to you. And it'll start with a letter, and oh, did you forget to file? Give us your money. And it'll get worse and worse until they get really nasty, and they'll steal your house or wipe out your bank account or stick you in a cage. We all know that. And yet, we still talk as if, well, we choose to do that, but we cooperate voluntarily. And so on the one hand, most people, they know that every law is a threat backed by the threat of violence, or is a command backed by the threat of violence. And on the other hand, it's like they don't know it. It's like we're trained not to see it because they describe it using different words. And when they say, we represent you, that is the most bizarre lie. Well, maybe the second most bizarre lie. I'll get to the first in a minute. If somebody bosses you around and hurts you if you disobey him and takes your money and sticks you in a cage if you resist, he is not your servant. Moral human beings interact voluntarily, which is why the only moral political philosophy is actually anti-political, is voluntarism. Because anything that isn't voluntarism is, by definition, involuntarism, which is another term for violence. Don't ever imagine for a moment that somebody who would force their agenda on you is doing it for your benefit. When you get a check from the government, there's one reason you're getting that. They are buying your loyalty with somebody else's money. And when we fall for that, we are the ones giving them power, not only over the neighbors that we want violently controlled, but over ourselves. If you and your neighbor, if that guy comes to your front door and then comes to his front door, and you both say, yeah, I like this deal, but take more of his money, tell him what to do. And your neighbor is saying the same thing about you. No, make him fund the things I care about. Here's this charity I want him to give to, and here's this program I want him to fund. It puts us at war with each other forever, and the only way out of that is for people to recognize that that guy who shows up at your front door is the enemy of humanity. And what every decent, moral human being has to do is say, go away, I don't want you controlling me, and I don't want you controlling my neighbor. Not only will the political process never achieve freedom, and it never has before. If you want to point out an example anywhere in history, at any point in history, where voting has led to freedom, go for it. I don't know of any. Not only is that not the solution, it is the problem. And I use the analogy of the slave who every day, thinks what he's going to say to his master, and he gets this eloquent, heartfelt speech of why he should be free. Every day he goes to his master and says, Master, here is why you really should free me. And he goes on for half an hour while his master isn't even paying attention. His master says, yeah, get back to work. That goes on until the end of time, unless one day the slave says, I don't need his permission to be free. And then he walks away. That is what has to happen. As long as we petition and we whine for or against this or that legislation, and we vote and we cry to the masters and we protest to the masters, the one message that comes through is, we agree that it is up to you, masters, what we are allowed to do. Whatever you say after that, they don't hear, and it doesn't matter. When the day comes that we don't go to them, we don't protest, we don't vote, we just turn our backs on them and ignore them, that's how you get to freedom, and that's the only way you ever get to freedom, because as long as you are begging the master for his permission to keep what you earn or run your own life or make your own choices, you're not even free inside your own head. As long as you imagine you need legal permission to be free, you will never be free, which is why most of what I focus on is getting people to understand the authority you hallucinate into government is not real. If we don't hallucinate an obligation to bow and obey, they just disappear. They have no power. Authority is always in the eye of the beholder. If we imagine them to be our master, then they are our master. If we stop imagining that, they aren't anymore. Literally, what do you think 400 people in Washington would do if everyone else said, we don't really acknowledge your right to boss us around and take our money? People say, well, what about their enforcers? There wouldn't be enforcers. They're hallucinating it too. All the people who work for the IRS, the soldiers, the cops, all the people who implement the destructive bad ideas of the crooks in Congress, they hallucinate authority where there is none. You think congressmen are going to go door to door saying, you got to give us some money? No, they rely on their thugs to imagine authority where there is none. And then they rely on their victims to imagine it. Now, if one or two people occasionally say, you don't have the right to take my money, you don't have the right to boss me around, in come the thugs, the very well-programmed thugs who think they're righteous and noble, stomping on people who disobey the ruling class. But if everyone understands it, it just goes away. It just evaporates. Literally, you can ignore any tyrant out of existence if enough people understand the reality.
And the thing is, when people predict all the bad things that would happen if we don't have government, it's most of what needs to happen is just clarifying what disappears when the belief in authority disappears. No resources disappear. No know-how disappears. People don't disappear. The stuff doesn't disappear. The technology doesn't disappear. The one thing that disappears is the belief that certain people have an exemption from morality. And that is all. That's all that disappears when authority vanishes, is the idea that, well, those people, because of elections and constitutions and legislation, they're allowed to initiate violence and call it legislation. So when people say, but without government, blah, 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 what they're really saying is, but if we don't give some people permission to commit evil, how will this and this and this work? And just understanding that that's really the question makes the question seem as insane as it is.